Now today I'm going to show you how to work with a pen and wash technique, in other words waterproof pen and watercolour, whilst drawing and painting a cat. So it's time to get those pens going and those brushes wet. Let's get started. Now I've already got this very lightly transferred out to the paper, so I'm just going to take some of that surplus graphite off the paper. And incidentally, how I've done that, in case you're wondering, I've not done it freehand or anything like that. All I've done is printed off the reference photograph, or the outline drawing, whichever you've got at hand. Stuck that one down around the outside edge. Get some graphite back paper, so shiny side down. And slide that underneath like that. Okay, make sure it's stuck down as I mentioned. And go around that with a hard leaded pencil. By doing so, you'll end up with something like that. Got the idea? So graphite back paper, not the waxy version though, bear that in mind. So take some of that residual graphite off the paper so it does get everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Waterproof pens. Now this is one by Pilot, the Pilot drawing pen, and this one is a size 01. I've also got these as well, which is by Sakura, and that's the Pigment Micron fine liners. They're very good actually, I do like those. So I might incorporate those within the drawing as well. First thing I want to do is work around the edge, and because this is a pen and wash technique, I'll obviously be using watercolours with this as well. And because of this, I want to make sure that those hairs stick out in the right directions around the edge of the face. So when you're looking around here, they sort of kind of flick out like that, don't they? A little bit in places. Then stop. Then you've got the bridge of the nose coming down and so on. Work around the edge of the face first of all. Then we can start filling in everything inside as well. Alright, well, work out what the main things are first, okay? This is why we do lots of sketching first of all, just to ensure we know where every sort of pen stroke is going to go. Within reason, of course, I know. Now do note, I'm using my pen on its side. When you do that, what will happen? You find that you're just grazing the nib, like that, the side of that nib. And that in turn will give you some very fine lines to work with. So you can use those fine lines for those lighter, paler areas, especially around the bridge of the nose here, and also the whiter patches within the face. When you raise that pen up a little bit more, so something like this, then you find they get darker, slightly wider lines. I'm not putting any pressure on with this pen though. Do not press hard with a waterproof pen. You don't want to damage the tip of that. Just use the weight of the pen to apply that ink to the paper. So remember, varying the angle of that pen will vary the type of stroke and how light that stroke is on the paper. Even though, as we know, it's basically one colour ink. I know, but you can still create very fine marks like that, which looks like a different shade, doesn't it? Yeah, there you go. And that's what I'll be doing throughout this drawing, as you can see. So initially, mark in where all the main structures are. So you've got the eye, we'll go around the eye in a minute. So ensure you know where that goes. And also the pupil as well. And then, very carefully, around the nose. Where it's darker, increase the amount of marks that you can see. Okay. So when you increase marks closer together, I'm going to show you again. For example, I'm going to have my pen, probably that sort of angle like that. There you go. There. When you increase the lines like that, so you're going to have them closer together, the area will be darker. See that? But as you space them apart, it looks as if it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter, even though the ink is still the same. It's still dark, it's still black ink, isn't it? But it looks a little bit paler. You can also cross-hatch as well. So when you're working with lines like this, there's parallel lines all the way along, very quickly along. You can then cross-hatch it. So the idea will be is that you can just go this way, like that, to create a darker area. And the more you cross-hatch it, the more lines you create, I'm going to go the opposite way now, the darker that section will become. So if I keep going like this, you find it will get darker and darker and darker because there's many, many lines quite close together, as you can see. And that's how we can create darker areas through cross-hatching. Now, when you're working with a wildlife drawing like this one, you find it's a bit tricky to do cross-hatching. So what you need to think about doing is overlapping those lines. Is curves like that. Imagine those hairs. Plenty of curves. But those curves can be overlapped. Just overlap them like this. And overlap that side as well. And already, that looks like, well, sort of deep hair, doesn't it? Or deep fur. See what I mean? Or even grass blades. But I'll give you some ideas and different techniques you can use and how you can work with that pen to create those lighter, paler areas by using the edge of the nib like that, so the pen's nearly on its side, not quite. And also, not quite vertical, probably about 45 degrees, to create slightly darker lines, but of the same sort of thickness as well. I mean, after all, we're working with one thickness all the time, aren't we? 0, 1, there you go, that way around. Oh, one last thing, you don't always have to use lines. Where there's some areas like around this area here, the hairs are quite, well, messy, aren't they? Instead of being symmetrical or overlapping like we've done down there, you find that the hairs around here, I'll show you on the photo, are more like little squiggles, like this. So create little squiggle marks, like that, okay? Let that hand do a little bit of wandering, like so, alright? So plenty of little squiggles. But very lightly. Remember to angle that pen down for those lighter areas. And remember that if it's a slightly darker section, increase the amount of detail within that one area. And gradually lessening that detail as you work your way away from that area, from that darker section. And that will give you, again, that sort of light to dark feel, really, wouldn't it? All by working with squiggles. There you go, that's another technique for you. And that's one we'll definitely be using throughout this drawing. Now, did you know that cats are supposed to have 18 toes? No, really? 5 toes on the front paw and 4 toes on each of the back paws. Now, if you've got a cat, which I haven't, double check that for me, will you? I'd like to know. These are sort of factoids which I'm finding on the internet at the moment. The thing with pen and wash is that if you go too dark, then you find when you put the colours over the top, the colours won't stand out at all, you know? So it's trying to get the balance right with how much pen you use and, well, how much colour you use as well. Now this is still sort of the lightest layer, if you call it a light layer. So all this is like, I've lightened down using the side of the pen for the white area above the nose there. I do the same down here as well, so we've got the pattern coming down there, haven't we? And also down here, it's like a waterfall really, isn't it? A waterfall of white fur, just working its way down. We've got the sections along the side of the mouth, which is for the whiskers. They obviously appear from here. I'm going to show you what to do with the whiskers very shortly as well. So bear with me on that one. There's more than one way you can do it. But Paul, they're white whiskers. You got white paper. Stay tuned and I'll show you what I'm going to do with that later on, okay? Now when you work around the mouth, look at the angles of those lines. It's very, very important. What direction do they go? What direction do they grow, to be more precise? Looking at the fur around here, below the mouth, or just this side of the mouth, you find these lines go in the direction, what would you say, 4 o'clock direction. Think of a clock face. 4 o'clock. Then works its way around to probably 5 o'clock. It's getting later. Then down towards 6 o'clock and so on. And then sort of stays between 6 and 7 around there. Underneath, similar down there as well. So they sort of branch out towards 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and then 5 o'clock underneath. Overlapping those lines as well. I'm not going in with the deepest details just yet, but I will do very soon. Now here's a very interesting fact for you. Did you know apparently Green Cat was born in Denmark in 1995? Green. Some people believe that the high levels of copper in the water pipes nearby may give the fur sort of a green tint. Now that one is interesting, isn't it? Increasing the amount of lines again within, well, those darker areas really. So for example, down here, I've increased the amount of darker lines down here. Because on the photograph, as you can see, it's very dark, isn't it, in that area? So it gets a bit lighter around there and goes slightly darker again around there. This area here, which is the corner of the eye, what I want to do is just very lightly stipple this in a minute. Work out the structure first of all, bit of a V just in there, that comes down to roughly about there, yeah, something like that. And then what I'm going to do is stipple it. I'm still working with the size 0-1 nib. I may change to another one in a bit for those really dark areas. When you've got a wider nib, you can sort of fill areas in without making it too blocky. You've got to be careful when you fill darker areas in. Fill them in with detail, not just by simply filling them in. I'm going to work around the outside of the eye now, very lightly working on that shape. I want it nice and smooth as well. Very carefully like that. And you can see on the lower side of the eye, quite dark underneath there. So I can darken this part of the eye. Then higher up, very lightly, lift away from that line. And darken that line again, only where it's needed. For example, it's going to be dark here. Really dark in there, you need a torch in there, don't you? Little flashlight just so you can see where you're going. Very lightly scumble in that area there. And stipple, I did mention stippling around here to create some texture. Tiny little dots like that. Now, the eye, yeah. The thing with the eye is that it's colourful, isn't it? And because it's colourful, you don't really want to be putting much in the way of detail in with the pen. Not really, no. We'll paint that eye in separately. What you do want to put in, though, is that pupil. Ooh, here we go. I'm going to be very careful with this. I'm going to err on the side of caution because I don't want to make this too wide. Look at the gentle curve you can see within that reference photograph. Don't go too high or too low with it. And don't go too wide just yet. We can widen it. The more confident we become as in drawing it out. Very carefully. And even though there doesn't look much of a gap there, does it? But there is a gap there because we've got the shadow from the eyebrow, as I always call it, because it's an eyebrow, isn't it? Around here. And the shadow goes just above the top of that pupil there. So probably if I just lightly put it in, using the side of the pen, around there, and it's nearly level, but slightly curved. Just very lightly graze it into the canvas, you know where it goes. Then you can start to fill it in. And what I'm going to do is go one direction. I know it's a pop group, I realise that. One direction just there. Turn your body around and do the same on the other side. So you're crisscrossing, but very lightly doing it initially. Again, I'm being very cautious with this because I don't want to go too dark too quick. And the edge of this shadow is quite blurry as well. So I'm going to start to increase the amount of marks now in there. I want this really dark in there. But as I said earlier on, I don't want to simply block it in because if you block it in, it looks too false. There's no texture there at all then. Fill this in gradually with detail. So darken the outside edge of the eye first of all. Just that area there, then blend it. So darker, lighter, darker. Within that one small section there. And inside the eye, using the edge of the pen, remember, use that pen very lightly, like this. It's a scrap watercolour paper, as you can see. But on its side, so you're just catching the side of that nib. And put in some very light texture marks where it's needed. You can just see a bit of a darker area coming down there, look. Yeah, something like that. Barely discernible, I know. Then gradually darken it. Don't lift that pen higher, keep it low. By just going over the same marks time and time again. It's all delicate work, isn't it? But very, very enjoyable. Until that's obviously dark enough and you think, yeah, that should do it, yeah. Then you can do the same in other areas as well where you think it's needed. But don't do too much, not in these areas here. And just a few odd ones. Dotted around the eye. Here and there. Okay, let's do a little bit more of that fur now. And then once all that's done, I'll put the darker tones on using a thicker nib. And then it's time to add that watercolour paint over the top. Here's a fact for you. Cats can apparently jump up to 6 times their length. Come on. Wow. That's a really good long jump, isn't it? That would suggest that I can jump 36 feet. Nah. I can barely jump 3 feet, never mind that. And for the eye, I'm going to use a size 2 brush, this one here. Give it a quick wet a minute so you can just see it. Nice, decent, very sharp, long tip. And this is a Rosemary & Co. XP Series 366. Just out of interest, there you go. So all I'm going to use is a mixture of Gambo Hue. So I'm going to put that in there, though. That'll do. clean brush and burnt sienna. Too much. Some more Gambo hue. I might put that in a separate well. Put that one in there now. And the other colour I'm going to use is phthalo blue, or another name for that is intense blue. Or I can use Windsor blue, that'd be just as good. There you go. And all I'm going to do is first of all use the blue just on one side, the right hand side should I say, of this section here. Like that, quite intense. This is more of a milky consistency. It's not creamy, not really thick or anything like that. It's a little bit thicker than water. With a clean brush, watch out for any water runs. Just dampen down the lighter area there, like the unpainted area. Then tiny circles, tickle that edge in, so that blue fades to the white as it goes across. And that's that area done. Okay, quick blast with the hairdryer, and we'll paint that eye next. Okay, Gambo hue. I think I'll water that down. Just really, really watery. More water than pigment, really. And just apply this directly to the eye now. Here we go. Oh, I know. Daring, isn't it? A blast of colour on the paper here. Don't touch the blue, whatever you do. Oh, that rhymed. Because if you do, you know what colour you'll end up with, don't you? What do you mean pink? Green, of course. You know that anyway. Of course you do. And then within the eye, let's go for the mixture of the Gambo hue and the burnt sienna. Drop a little bit of that in there now as well, but very selectively. You can see on the right hand side of the pupil, got a bit of brown in there. This is grey on that side. I might get some Payne's grey in a minute. Add some of that in as well. Some basic details around there. I'll probably have to blend those in shortly. It's all about building up the details within that eye. It really is. You've got to be careful though. You don't want to completely obliterate that lovely yellow we've got there. Let's get a small amount of Payne's grey. Make sure there's not too much on the brush. And then very lightly touch the paper. Some basic details we can see within the eye. Now, normally when we work with pen and wash, the idea is, no pun intended, the idea is that you'll work with all the detail first of all by working with that pen. And then the wash over the top is literally a wash. But I'm changing that a little bit here because of the simple fact that we've got to make sure we've got like a semi-detailed eye. Just adding some very light marks in, take some of that paint off the brush. Just a nearly dry brush. That's the key. Who's got a key? That's the key, is to make sure that your brush isn't too overloaded when you're doing something like this. Take your time because there should never be any rush to do this. There really shouldn't. Then once that layer is dry, if it's not enough, you can just add another layer over the top. But remember to not cover up all that lovely yellow within the eye. Now the inside edge of the eye, I'm going to use a little bit of alizarin crimson. So this one here. Let's go for French ultramarine or ultramarine blue, or just simply ultramarine. Then drop that in within that area, allowing some of the areas to show through. So where it's lighter and you've got the light kind of sparkles just over the edge there, make sure that you allow those to show through. Probably have to darken this colour just a little bit more, just by adding a small amount of Payne's grey. A bit too red, isn't it? Did you know that cats have the largest eyes relative to the head size of any mammal? Now do me a big favour and click on that subscribe button and that like button down below this video. Every time somebody does that for my watercolour channel here, it just helps my channel get found out a little bit more by other budding artists like yourself. And if you do that, you've got one massive thank you from me. We've got burnt umber and a small amount of lamp black to a watery consistency. Alizarin crimson again in that one, with a touch, only a touch, of opera rose. Quite a strong colour that one, isn't it? It really is. In fact, I've put a small amount of burnt sienna in there as well. That's got it. That's what I want. And in this one, we've got raw sienna and burnt sienna. Again, to a watery consistency. Okay, a larger brush this time around. I'm going to start off with our lovely sort of pinky red colour. and start to add this in around here. Probably a bit more water in there. You can see this sort of showing through. It's a skin colour, isn't it? Just through that fur. I'll just put a little bit in there. You don't need to go too mad on this, but just enough to make it stand out. Just in there as well. And we'll soften this down as well in a minute. Tiny amount of alizarin crimson in here. We'll blend that out. Let's do it before it dries. And that's because we can just see the pink of the ear in there, can't we? And blend this as well. This is where we're going to be going in with wet and wet washes now. Now, I haven't stretched my watercolour paper. So you know very well what will happen there, don't you? Yep, equal cockle, equal bend, equal twist. It will warp. But that's okay, I'm not too worried about that. This is just a bit of fun. Then we're going to go in for the lovely raw sienna with the burnt sienna mix. Add that in just underneath the eye. It's all about looking around and seeing what you can see. I know. What can you see? What colours can you work out that you'll need? This colour, for example, is also down here as well. So just in this area here. Remember, we've got this white sort of waterfall coming down. And this is in this area here. And by adding this in, we can make sure that that waterfall stands out. Vary a little bit of brown, just not all the same. That's that one area done. Then the same around here. So look around, see what you can see. Look at those colours. Don't go too rich with them, you don't need to. Because if you do find it's a little bit pale, let it dry and then go over the top again with the same colours. Just to enrich it that little bit more. It's easy to work with watery washes to begin with, and then gradually thicken them as you go along. If you're going with a thicker colour first of all, you find it harder to lift paint off than actually add paint on. So just be very cautious when you do this, okay? Now apparently humans have 206 bones. Really? Okay, check on that one. But cats have 230 bones. Wow. Now here's another one for you. Please don't try this one with your friends. Apparently when a cat sticks their backside in your face, it's actually a gesture of friendship. That's why I said, don't do that with your friends, okay? They might not appreciate it. Now, the front of the head is really grey, isn't it? Like a black and white sort of feel to it. And you're the artist. If you want to change that, you can do. So you can add a bit of colour in there. Just a touch though, not much. Just in places. So dampen the paper first of all, so I've done that. With a lightly dampened brush, not soaking wet though. Then drop in just a tiny amount of colour in there as well. This is the beauty about working with waterproof pens. It's hence the name, they just don't move, do they, on the paper? So if you try doing this with a normal biro or a normal felt tip pen, then you find that pen work will just simply move and blend in with those colours, which isn't a pretty sight, to be honest with you. Not really. Now then, the nose. Looking at that nose, it's more of an orangey red, isn't it? So I'm going to go for a small amount, very small amount, of cadmium orange. That one there, look. And also a small amount of alizarin crimson. We'll try that. It's a sort of an orangey red nose, isn't it? A bit more orange around there. And just fill it in. Add a touch of the same mix again, just on the inside edge. Just give it more of a gradual blend. There we go. Now whiskers. Now we know the whiskers are white, so what we can do, get some masking fluid, which is this one here. Look at the state of that. It's all over the place. Give it a light mix with a cocktail stick. I'm going to use my cocktail stick to add in some whiskers. Trying to get in this right position. So the idea is you're going to flick like that. Trust me on this. Honest. I have a way of doing things. Just drag out that masking fluid and get a little bit more on the cocktail stick if you need to. Don't make them too thick. All this will be taken away afterwards, okay? And make sure it doesn't clog up either. This side, don't worry about that. I'm going to show you another method on that one in a minute. But I'm just going to very lightly flick a few little lines here and there. I think that'll do for those sections there, won't they? A few more down around the bottom of the mouth. Like that. Very lightly. All I'm doing is just dipping the very tip of this cocktail stick in my masking fluid. And I'm using that to flick. And that will do. Right. Okay, let it dry. And we'll add a small amount of colour on that background. The masking fluid is nice and dry. I'm going to get some clean water and drop this on the right hand side of the cat, as you can see. I want it reasonably wet as well. I'm going to apply the water further than I need to add that paint. You'll see why in a minute. Now you probably noticed I've got another mix going on there. That's a creamy version of Lamp Black and Burnt Umber. And using my size 6 brush, a bit more down there, like, yeah, that'll do. Grab some of that and drop it in. Look at that. Look at that. Don't go too close to the cat just yet, alright? You'll see why in a minute. Oh, come on. Oh, yes. Then when you've just about run out of paint, then bring that line lower down now. Very carefully using the very tip of the brush. Make sure you've got a good tip on that brush to do this as well, by the way. Then you can start to add that in lower down. The same down here. Into that wet paper. So we'll layer over the top. Very carefully. And then down here as well. And the same higher up. Bit of a splashback going up there. Oh well. Just to there. There you go. Now that needs to dry naturally at room temperature for a little while, okay? So when the paper's completely bone dry, then you can remove that masking fluid. But whilst that's doing that, I'm going to get a white pen. It's a white jelly roll. Put it the right way around, Paul. Jelly roll 05 Sakura. Or you could use this one. And this one is by Uniball and it's a Signo Broad. This is the Signo one, look. You can see why it's broad. It's quite a thick line, isn't it? And I think for whiskers, it might be a little bit too wide. Whereas the other one, the Sakura one, you find the lines a little bit narrower, a little bit paler. And that might just do the job. So I'm going to use that one initially. We'll see how it goes anyway. We don't know. Having a play, that's all I'm doing here. Just add some white whiskers around here. Now if it doesn't stand out, we will have to use the other one. Either that or you could use white paint. Let's try the broad one instead then. See, that just about stands out. Only just. But it's good enough to give the impression that we've got some whiskers there. Now, very often when I'm working on a very detailed watercolour, this isn't quite as detailed as that, you find what I tend to use is white paint. So watercolour white, or you can use white gouache, something like this one here, look. It was a Winsor & Newton designer gouache. And you can use that to add those whiskers in instead. And all you would normally do, just out of interest, grab yourself a fine brush. I've got a size 00 here. A small amount of that. Load the brush up and wipe some of that off. And use that to add the white whiskers on instead. Too thick. As you can see. A little bit more down there. And there you go. And you can also use that as well, or the gel pen, to add the highlights. Just about there. If you want to as well, within the eye. Just on there, not just on the side. And this adds a bit more life to the eye as well. And maybe just a touch lower down in the eye as well. Everything's nice and bone dry, and so is my finger. Probably a couple of fingers. There you go. And I'm using a piece of kitchen roll. Okay, here we go. Masking fluid. Let's take it off. Using that dry all-free finger. Look at that. Oh, yeah. And that will give us some ideas on how to draw and paint a cat using a pen and wash technique. Now if you do fancy learning how to paint an eye of a cat, a very detailed eye at that, using watercolours, have a look at the link to the top right hand corner of the screen. I'll see you there.